Welcome back to the 1760 sessions where we talk to founders building systems and impact. I'm Harry Thornberry, as you know, from 1760 Strategic AI. And today I'm joined by the fantastic Vance Clement, founder of Lineus Medical, a medical device company that's literally saving lives with an innovation inspired by a petrol pump, which I'm sure we will come on to. So, with over 30 years in medical devices and a team that's just flipped their entire business model from bottom up to top down sales, Vance has created something remarkable, a simple breakaway connector that prevents IV line complication, protects nurses from exposure, and gives patients their dignity back. Vance, bit of a lengthy intro, but fantastic to have you on.
That made me sound like a superhero. So thank you. Thank you very much.
You're a superhero in my eyes. So, the big question that everyone will probably be thinking, having listened to my lengthy intro, is walk us through that petrol pump moment and how did a gas station mishap lead to a life-saving medical device?
Yeah, it's a great story. We had a nurse in Little Rock, Arkansas that was frustrated with IV care, a lot of complications, and one of those complications that frequently happens is a patient will actually pull their IV line out of their arm. That can be due to an agitated patient. That it can be people with cognitive issues that don't understand what they're doing, and it can be you or I getting up to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night and we forget we have an IV on our line. It goes underneath the hospital bed rail, when we go into the bathroom. So he was having lunch. This nurse was having lunch with a businessman, and the business person had actually driven away from the gas station pump with the pump handle still in the gas tank. And I don't know if any of the listeners have had this happen before. They say this happens to about 10% of people, but and I think with cell phones, it's obviously exacerbated the problem. But this person gets in the car and you drive away. Well, there's a breakaway at the top of the gas pump so that they don't want to damage their pump and have the parking lot fill up with gasoline. So there's a breakaway, and when you drive away, it will separate and it will shut off the flow of fluid from the gas pump. And then, of course, the customer, as they're driving down the road, looks in the side mirror and they see the black hose dangling from their gas tank. Will drive back and they can put everything back together, and the gas pump still works again. So our businessman that was at the lunch had this happen twice. So his immediate reaction to the nurse was, "Why don't you make a device like at the gas station to protect? They have one at the gas station to protect the pump, and you can do this at the hospital and protect the patient." So that's what we set about doing when we had this idea.
So, one of the questions I had following on from this, because it's such a great story. So, when your co-founder, one of the business guys who first found this out, approached you, I think it was 3 months later after that initial idea with, say, I think you mentioned a working prototype that didn't actually work. What made you think this was worth pursuing?
Yeah, well, I had spent over 20 years in orthopedics, and I was in the operating room all the time.
Yeah.
I know a lot about hip replacements and knee replacements. So this is completely different scenario. This is up on the floor in the hospital, and operating room time is very expensive time. Obviously, when you have somebody on the table under anesthesia and you have all this expensive equipment around, it's very, very expensive. Well, up in the
Yeah.
room is completely different. And I didn't understand that space very well. And I had never had nurses as a customer. My customers were orthopedic surgeons mainly. And so that was a big change for me. I had to do a lot of investigation before I actually joined the founding team to work on this product. I needed to make sure it seemed like a great idea. It seemed like a very practical idea, but I wasn't sure it would be a good idea. And I actually worked for the company about 20 hours a week for 2 months for free, doing my own due diligence to make sure I was joining something that was worthwhile, like you just said, Harry. And the thing that flipped me over the top was I also had some money to invest and buy into this whole thing. And I went to a focus group that the nurse was leading. And you can imagine a nurse had not led a focus group before. That's not a part of their job. And he had asked me if I could help him with this focus group. And I had done maybe 40 focus groups. So it was something I could really help him and contribute to. And we were in this meeting with 15 nurses that had never seen the device before. And of the 40 focus groups I had done before, I had never ever seen such a positive response to a product or a new invention as these 15 nurses had with SafeBreak, our device. And so when I walked out of that meeting, I'm like, I'm all in. I've been a full-time, employee and founder
Yeah.
ever since that point in time. Yeah, it was a real difference maker.
Proof was in the pudding, and I love that sort of wow factor. There's nothing better than showing someone something else that potentially you're aligned with, and they have that amazing sort of aha moment. I can vision this within my own organization.
So I have told how you use our device and presented it to nurses for the first time maybe 10,000 times. But I presented to a nurse this week on a video conference, and 72 years old at a children's hospital in Florida. And her first response, I've never seen anything like this. This is amazing.
Yeah.
It never gets old. I've done it 10,000 times. It never gets
Can
old.
you show us a demo
When
today?
that aha moment in their brain, yes, I'd love to. I'd love
Yeah, yeah,
to.
yeah.
So I'll show everybody the little device. I'll make it look really big. It looks like the Empire State Building when I do like that, but it's actually quite small. But I'll show everybody how it works. The nurse will take the IV tubing that goes to the IV pump. So this is really long tubing, probably about 2 meters. And the nurse will screw it into SafeBreak like that. They fill this tubing up with fluid until they have a drop or two come out the end, because you don't want to put air into the human body. So you always fill the devices up with fluid. And then on the other side, the patient can have an IV anywhere on their body. And almost every hospital is using what's called a needleless connector today. This allows the nurse to hook up and disconnect from the patient's IV without losing any fluid. It's like kind of like an instant shut-off valve. So there are probably 15 different brands of these, and our device works with all of them. These connections on the end are industry standard. So the nurse will take an alcohol wipe, get that connector clean, and then they will screw in the other end of SafeBreak. And that's the entire installation process. So before our device existed, they took the tubing from the pump and connected it directly to the patient. So we've just created this new breakaway, this weak portion of the tubing right here with our device. And I'm going to go back and I'll show all the people watching. You can see that we want to accommodate activities of daily living. You should be able to go to the bathroom and brush your teeth and not have this device separate. We only want it to separate when there's a harmful or a damaging force that comes across the IV line. So I'll pull on it with a good yank here, and you can see that when you get it caught underneath the bed rail, it'll separate on purpose. So
No
on
liquid.
the patient side, there's a valve here that when it's separated, it closes off and it keeps the patient from bleeding. And on the other side that goes to the IV pump, the IV pump doesn't know if it's in your arm or laying on the floor, so all it tries to do is just to keep pumping fluid. So we shut off a valve here and keep the IV pump from making the spill on the floor and the bed. So we're eliminating the sheet changes and the gown changes for the patient and the nurse, things that aren't value added to anybody. And we also make the IV pump alarm. When we occlude the line to the IV pump, there's an occlusion alarm. So the nurse is getting the beep, beep, beep. It lets them know they need to come in the room and check things out with the patient. And so when they come in, they'll see an IV line is separated for the first time in their life on purpose. And all they have to do is they take the two components off, they'll throw them in the trash, and they'll open up a brand new sterile device that's packaged like this.
Amazing.
And put it in the line and restart the patient's IV without the need for another needle stick.
So small and so usable, and it's just incredible the impact that something like that is having. Um, Thank you very much for the demonstration. And I recall from our previous conversation, you mentioned that the original design, I think it had a little plastic stick that would potentially fall out when the device separated. Why was this such a critical problem to solve, especially with something like a chemotherapy drug?
Right. So the trick with these devices is you have to somehow take the energy from this separation. It's an engineering problem. You have to take this energy that's created by the separation and make two valves close. And the trick is, how do you make that happen? Well, the original idea was that we would just have two valves, and they'd be propped open by a little stick in between them. And then when the device separated, the stick would fall out, and that would allow these two valves that had been propped open, they would now be able to close. So that was the original idea that I saw when they were explaining how this might work to me. And I just realized it wouldn't work when I initially saw it based on my background in medical devices. And what happens if, first of all, where does this little stick go when it comes out? Does it go into somebody's eye or so on and so forth? And then the other thing is, what kind of medication are you infusing through it? If it's saline solution, a little plastic stick with saline solution, that's no big deal. But what if it's a radioactive chemotherapy drug treating somebody for cancer? You can't have a little radioactive plastic stick flying around the room. So I knew initially when I saw it that that wasn't going to be the final solution. We had to come up with something better. So ultimately it took a long time. It took 18 months and a lot of money, but we ultimately came up with a solution that allowed for there to be no flying parts and to shut off a chemotherapy drug without chemotherapy, coming out.
So incredible. At what point there must have been this moment when you realized this just isn't just a convenience device, but something that could actually save lives.
Yeah, we had a hospital in Cleveland, Ohio, and there was a child that had a port placed in their chest, and this for delivering chemotherapy. And this particular child had already damaged two ports, and these ports have to be placed under anesthesia, and it's placed under the patient's skin. So it's a very expensive thing, As soon as you talk about putting somebody under anesthesia in the operating room, we talked about how it's expensive time earlier. We're talking about the bills automatically $10,000, $15,000, et cetera. So they had this patient, and the patient was not in a unit where they were evaluating our device. The hospital was just trying to do a product evaluation. But they called in one of the members of the vascular access team, a nurse that specializes in IVs, because of the problem with this particular patient. And the nurse looked at it and said, SafeBreak is approved for use on ports, and I don't care if this patient's in our product evaluation or not. We're going to put one on them and see how it goes. And it turns out they placed SafeBreak on the patient. The patient went on to separate the device 3 times during that hospital stay, but their port was safe and they did not have any issues. So they were absolutely thrilled. And when I was talking to the nurses about it, they were talking about how the patient was becoming venous depleted. They weren't sure they were going to be able to put in another port if anything happened to this one. And then you're in real trouble. How do you get the medication to the patient? And so they actually attributed our device to possibly saving the patient's life. And as a founder of a company, I thought we were making something cool and it was going to be helpful. I never ever really thought it would save somebody's life potentially, and so that was just amazing as a
Yeah.
founder to hear that news.
Just winding back a second, for listeners who've never thought about IV complications, what actually happens when a patient tries to walk away from the IV pump?
Yeah, so the problems with IVs is pretty crazy how the complication rate. If you think about IVs, they really became prolific after World War One. So we're talking about 1918,
Yeah.
right? So this is a technology that's been around for 100 years, and the average failure rate in randomized controlled clinical trials is 46%, meaning that the IV will fail before its intended use is complete 46% of the time. So we've got a 100-year-old technology that fails almost half the time. And failure is the line occludes. It gets biologic buildup on the tube that's in your vein delivering the medicine, and it clogs. And of course, you can't pump medicine through a clogged IV catheter. So you got to take it out, got to start another one. The other one is dislodgement. Obviously, you rip out. And then there's one called infiltration, which is where the catheter is not in the patient's vein, but it's still underneath the skin, and the pump is continuing to pump medication, so their arm starts to swell. That happens, I've got it on a chart here on my wall.
Show me.
That happens 24% of the time on average,
Oh.
right? So terrible complication. If it's saline, it's not a big deal. Your body will absorb the saline, it'll go away. But if it's vancomycin or some really aggressive antibiotic, You'll end up with an open wound on your arm. You can even end up losing fingers and things like that from it. So it can be quite dramatic. And then the last one, which is also really common, I have this on the wall too here. 15% of the time, people get a complication called phlebitis. Phlebitis is just vein irritation where the vein walls are only a couple of cells thick. And you can imagine if you've got a plastic tube in there, it's getting jerked on back and forth.
Yeah.
It can scratch this wall, erode into the wall, and all of a sudden a patient that had an IV that was working well 2 hours ago, they now have a red streak on their arm, they have a burning sensation, and that's phlebitis. And that can be the medication now getting access to the vein wall and causing damage where 2 hours earlier where there wasn't a scratch, everything was great potentially. So those are really the four main complications and what happens, and they all just require an IV restart, generally in the other arm, and it costs about $50 each time they do that. 50 US bucks. I'm not able to translate into pounds.
Yeah, and do you know what, that relates to my next question that I had lined up to you. To be honest with you, I'd never thought in my life I'd be so interested in IV drips and complications. But it's a fascinating subject because Vance and I spoke before, and we spoke about a couple of different stories. I remember from I think the chief nerve officers meeting, you mentioned the brother who, as he said, it almost looked like a murder scene. They were in and out of bed so much, and the IV coming loose. So the AIDS contaminated blood that we spoke about. The big picture here is the cost of inaction to a hospital. What does that look like, do you think?
Right. Well, we say that here in the United States, if the average hospital has a 46% failure rate and the volumes on IVs are incredible, in the United States alone, there's 235 million. And so if you take that average complication rate, 235 million, and it costs $50 to replace one, we're talking about a $5 billion problem. So it's really common for a community hospital in your area to have an IV problem that is $250,000 or $500,000. It's a very large problem at the hospital. And if you have a patient that ended up with an infiltration where they lost a finger or something of that nature, you can imagine there's lawsuits, and the cost of that particular IV complication can be $100,000, $250,000 all by itself. The opportunity for this device to not only just help a patient avoid a needle stick, it can be something much greater. Like a hospital can, over the course of a year, reduce, depending on the size of the hospital, from 1,000 less needle sticks on their patients a year to 5,000 to 10,000. It all just depends on how large the hospital is. But every hospital has the exact same issues and exact same problems.
Yeah. And the importance is that we spoke about as well is getting your message out there and getting in front of these different people. So moving on to the actual business itself, and look, the story is one of my favorite to date. You've just got UK regulatory, stuttering my words, sorry, it's late in the day here. UK regulatory approval yesterday, I believe, or the day before. What does that open up for Lineus Medical?
Yeah, so, our mission of our company is to aid in the reduction of the pains associated with IV lines throughout the entire world. And the pains are different for different people. It's the expense at the hospital. For the patient, it's the actual physical pain of the needle stick. For the nurse, it's the wasted time. So we've been methodically trying to grow and gain regulatory clearances throughout the entire world, and there are some countries that just accept the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, the Gulf Coast countries, Saudi Arabia, different countries like that, also some of the Caribbean countries. So some of those are a little bit easier for us to move into. But Europe is 550 million people, I believe, for all the countries. And we achieved about 3 months ago clearance throughout the European Union. And that has, we've been
Amazing.
in business 10 years. So that was a big historic accomplishment. And then just this week, 2 days ago, clearance for the UK. So that just broadens another, 50, 60, 70 million people that we can possibly help impact. And there's no difference in an IV in an Englishman or a Frenchman or
Yeah,
a Russian or whatever,
that's the
right?
main point.
We all deserve a safe break on the line, is what I believe. So the next step for us are, establishing Irish and UK distributorships and things that can represent us well and get the word out in the UK.
Yeah, I'm gonna start spreading it every time I'm in a UK hospital. Don't worry, I'll have pamphlets, I'll have flyers that I can give out. Um, so you mentioned also that you've over the past 9 months you flipped your business model on its head. What wasn't working before, and where are you at now?
Yeah, I mean, the challenge with any startup is well, first is FDA clearance, and then after you get FDA clearance, everybody wants sales to be that hockey stick curve just as fast as it can be. We got cleared in the middle of the pandemic, which was an interesting time. Nurses are overwhelmed. They're retiring. They have suicide rates that double normal. All that kind of stuff. They're completely overwhelmed, and to be selling a product that requires every nurse in the hospital to be trained on, it's not the best time to get approved in the middle of a pandemic. I can tell you that. So it took us about 2 years to get out of the pandemic and to get back into a semi-normal environment, to understand if we were doing okay or not that doing that well, and so on and so forth. And we realized we weren't doing that great. That our sales cycle was super long, over 12 months, and that we needed to change how we were doing things. We were also going to conferences, and we were going to general nursing conferences like a critical care nursing conference, a medical surgical nursing conferences, etc. And these are big conferences, 5,000 people attending, and we were doing awesome. Nurses love the product. Hundreds of leads each show, get 200 leads. So you're thinking, we're going to come back, we're going to get 10 new customers out of this show
Yeah.
easily. But that wasn't the case. We did it for 2, 3 years, getting thousands of leads over the course of the year, but none of it really translated into new business. And it was mainly because the customer base that we were selling into, I'm used to orthopedic surgeons from my previous life. Orthopedic surgeons are alpha males, and they're very powerful at the hospital. I say alpha males, they're alpha females as well, but
Of course.
99% of orthopedic surgeons are male. So that is
Yeah.
almost a 100% true statement. But if he or she, as an orthopedic surgeon, wants to get a robot purchased at their hospital or a new operating room table, they just fight for it and do what they want. Yeah, and if the hospital's not going to give them what they want, they always have the option of taking their 300 hip replacement surgeries and 100 knee surgeries to competitive hospital across town or 30 minutes away. And that is a huge, huge financial loss for their hospitals. So hospitals accommodate them. So let's talk about floor nurses. They're overworked, tired, and they are
Stressed.
taking care. They're an individual performer with 6 patients, 5 patients each at the hospital, and they see this at a show and they come in and they tell their supervisor, "Hey, I saw this great thing. We've got about 3 or 4 more layers of hospital management before we get to the
Go through.
chief nursing officer." And so ultimately, we diagnosed that as being our biggest problem. That although our user loved our product evaluations would go really, really well. Ultimately, they just didn't have the power to push it through or the wherewithal sometimes.
So what's changed now you've started
Yeah, so we were
targeting?
selling bottom up essentially, and it was
Yeah.
time to kind of flip that model on its head. So instead of going to conventions where floor nurses are, we have switched. We're going to nursing meetings where directors of departments, chief nursing officers are in attendance, and we've seen going top down being a lot better. And the other thing is that our outreach has just stopped to floor level nurses. We know that when we get to them and it's time to do a product eval and they see the product, they're going to love it. They always have. But it's about getting the leadership at the hospital engaged and involved, and it being their idea to do the product evaluation. And it's just completely changed things for us and how we sell.
Yeah, do you know what? I had a lot of questions lined up to ask you, and you pretty much covered everything. It's like, so there are 2 million nurses in the US who love the product when they see it, and that is just such a challenge, taking it upwards. But it's interesting to hear all these approaches that you're taking to get to the top, that chief nurse officer. Um, the likes of a director. So as a next step, walk me through what your current lead generation approach is. You mentioned you hired a calling company, I think, in the past, and what kind of
Yeah,
results are you seeing?
yeah, yeah. I've been remarkably surprised where I've had a lot of phone calls about it, but never taken up any of those calls to see if it would work for us. But we had a new vice president of sales who had used it previously and thought it would be impactful. So
Yeah,
yes, we engaged a cold calling company, and where we used to go to these conferences and get 200 leads, the goal after the conference is to get those nurses to then have a meeting with us for an hour instead of 5 minutes in a convention booth to really go over things, really understand it, what a product evaluation looks like, et cetera, and move forward in the selling process. So when we came back from these meetings, it's fighting and fighting for that 1 hour call. Well, we've gone to this cold calling opportunity, and whether we've got the right person doing the cold calling or we hired the right company, it has yielded around 20 calls a month where I am getting that 1 hour right out of the gate
yeah,
with a
good.
director of nursing or a chief nursing officer, head of quality at the hospital or infection prevention. These are the people we want to be talking to. And so that has dramatically changed the sales cycle, obviously, from going to a convention, spending all that money on it, and then just trying to get this call. We now have 20 of these happening roughly a month with this cold calling outreach, which was shocking and wonderful
Yeah,
to me.
so that's obviously some fantastic results. And my background, Vance, is I've done every part of the sales cycle from the cold calling through to going to the conferences, through to doing consultative selling and closing, and it's no easy job. So the conversion rate from the calling, it sounds like it's a fantastic investment. Um, is that where you want it to be, or is there room to scale on that?
Yeah, obviously, the person that calls, they call them a business development representative.
Yeah, BDR.
They are, that's a very common term for them, but they are making 200 calls a month, getting 10% of those to get to a call. That's really good. We can hire more, and it's just a matter of the challenge now for us is going from that one individual hour call to going to a committee call where the CNO's there, somebody from purchasing's there, et cetera. We broaden that out. We know
You've
that
got the
one nurse can't
buying
get
team
our
there. Yeah.
product into an entire hospital. We've got to develop a team of supporters. So now, and I will say the first 10 calls that I did, I wasn't that successful at nailing down that second call.
Takes
And
a
that's a
while.
learning on my part. But now, I will say the last 20, we are getting a good hit rate for, we're establishing that second call while we're still on the phone, getting a date. We're going to call back. We're going to discuss it, and go from there. And so it's starting. We're starting to achieve our objectives of shortening the selling cycle, moving things along faster, top-down selling, and this cold calling is facilitating that.
So if you could double your qualified leads tomorrow without doubling your sales team or the people that are joining the calls, what would that unlock for Lineus Medical, do you think?
Yeah, obviously, like I'm doing the calls currently as CEO, and you say, is that what do you really want me doing 8 hours a week of is introductory phone calls about the product?
Yeah.
So the goal is to expand, maybe have another BDR, end up with 40 calls a month. We can hire a young business professional that handles all those calls, gets them to the second stage of phone calling. Well, that's going to free me up to concentrate on things that are more important to the business overall, such as that are more strategic, such as here in the United States, we have group purchasing organizations that hospitals belong to, and that's how they buy their product, and you have to be on contract with them. We have some contracts, we need more. So that's the kind of place where it'll free me up to spend my time to handle more strategic things, and I'll still be involved in the sales process as it gets
Of course.
further and
I think the
deeper
way you
into it.
tell the story is fantastic.
Well, I would say for any company, it's hard to replace the founder experience from scratch. It's just really hard for
Of
anybody
course.
to replicate that.
Being a co-founder myself, I resonate with that entirely. So have you ever thought about any automating any parts of your business before?
Well, it's interesting. It's an interesting question. Manufacturing automation? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Like we got to make a lot of these devices. As I mentioned, a hospital can use 25,000 of them, just one hospital. So you can imagine we get 10 or 100 hospitals. All of a sudden, we need to produce 2.5 million safe breaks. So we have a automated assembly cell, and we can make a safe break every 6 seconds. But the future will obviously be standardizing our operating procedures and automating office-based work, which we have put less emphasis and effort into.
Of course. So so this is what I'm going to wrap up with. I've realized we're at time, and I'm quite annoyed because I reckon we could keep talking and talking. There's
That's
so much
good.
to uncover here in terms of operationally. There's stuff to uncover around. Well, we know your journey, but there's a lot more to be said, and I'm quite gutted to be ending on this. But my big question is, what does the next 3 to 5 years look like for you?
Yeah, our big thing in 2026 is, and we're well on our way, is to really establish the economic value proposition. This device saves money. It doesn't matter about needle sticks and all of the other stuff. I mean, saving lives matters, of course, but needle sticks is less important to the hospital. If we can provide better care and save money, that's when we're pouring gasoline on the fire. We have proven that we reduce IV complications statistically significantly, but we haven't done the really hard work that attaches the dollar amounts that are being saved. And we're in the process of doing that. And I believe that's going to change everything. That'll turn on the faucet for things that will end up growing our team. We'll have some case studies from children's hospitals, from military hospitals, veterans hospitals, community hospitals. All of those things will change things. And I think in the 3 to 5 year time frame, that will also expand out into this device works in many different places. It can work for in helicopters and ambulances that are bringing people to the hospital. And it also, veterinarians are doing surgery as well. So this can help horses and dogs and barnyard animals, so
Pomeranians?
yeah, Pomeranians. So the outreach of it could be a lot more than it is today. So after we get a good foothold and expand into acute care hospitals that everybody thinks about first, there's all these ancillary markets where we can help human and animal patients as well.
Amazing. And there's a part there that I wanted to touch upon. It's You mentioned the cost saving. Does this could potentially unlock a new audience of people for you to talk to at a hospital? If you're talking to a CFO of a hospital or a head of finance and saying, "Hey, we can cut your costs by X," it's opening up a new sales route for you, is it not?
Yeah, absolutely. So we could change things clinically for nurses, and they will introduce us to other nurses at other hospitals, and that's helpful and it moves things along. But when you save a hospital money and the CFO finds out about it, and there are 4 other hospitals in the system, they will drive the product through their system to
Amazing.
save money overall. So if one hospital's saving $100,000, they can save $500,000 a year if they
Yeah,
put it through the whole system. So yes, that economic value proposition, and when the accountants and the financial side of the hospital organization gets it, then it just helps drive the business all the more.
incredible. As one door opens, many others open as well. Vance, this has been awesome, and I can't thank you enough for giving your time to speak with me today. All the best with the future and unlocking the UK. I'm being based over here. Let me know how I can help. And I look forward to speaking with you again. Hopefully, we'll get you back on for another pod.
Thank you, Harry. I'm flattered to be with you, and we're going to be looking at how we can use AI to help advance, the business.
Amazing. I'll stop it there.